to Ryan Nobles. Good morning.
Hello, Bill. How are you? Hello, Bill. There's a lot of stuff going on right now.
Yeah.
I wish you would talk to me directly instead of
I'm-
Brian Boble, whatever his name is.
It's Ryan.
He's from your favorite network.
Ryan Nobles.
He's a good man. He's a good man. Now listen, let
CNN.
me the Clinton News Network. Let me tell you a little something about these kids. They're crying. They're in the fenced-in area. Listen, while Rachel Maddow's crying on her show, she's not telling you what the real plan is. All right, let me tell you a little something. It's a great plan. All right, we're
Sorry,
gonna
Ryan,
send
really
the
sorry about
kids
this.
to space. They're going to be our space force. We'll get them away from the country.
That makes sense.
And Mexico's going to pay for it because we're not going to aid any of these countries anymore. We're giving them money and they're sending them
And
here.
if they grow up as space cadets, they're going to be really well trained.
Listen, I'm only halfway through The Martian, okay, Ray?
Okay.
So I don't really know the rest of the
Mr.
story.
President, could you please leave the studio?
I'm all set, thank you. This has been great. A lot of fun.
We enjoyed it. I think Ryan really enjoyed it.
That was fantastic.
Good morning, Ryan Nobles. Good morning.
That was a big get, Bill. You were really on the front line.
Well, listen, I did a direct tweet to him, and he immediately responded. So
He just happened to be in central New York today, so he stopped in.
They could change if they did that plan to NASA to NAUSA, not allowed in the United States of America. That's
right.
what they could change it to.
So we put him in space. All right, Ryan.
Can I just tell you something quick before we start, Bill?
Yes.
So I know you're having an issue up there in Utica with your fire chief, which I don't know the details of that, so I don't want to get into that last night.
Yeah.
But there's a program called Data Miner, which is a program that picks up information off of tweets and sends them to news organizations so they can be aware of something.
Yep.
So a tweet went out yesterday about John Kelly, the acting fire chief, stepping down from his job. And let me just say there were some people in Washington who thought it was a different John Kelly, and it caused a little bit of a concern for about 25 minutes last night.
That is amazing.
Oh, my gosh.
Wow. I never thought about that.
No, you don't make that connection.
So everybody went nuts all of a sudden.
Oh, it's just some fire chief.
It was a
Who
very
cares?
short period of time, and people figured it out pretty quickly. But, if you took the tweet, I think it was a tweet from Spectrum News that said John Kelly is planning to resign after text messages. People people like, we need to figure this out. What's going on here? And then they quickly figured it out. But.
That is.
I think the Huffington
crazy.
Post already had a story.
And I got to tell you something. I can't picture that John Kelly sending those text messages out for the record. Just can't imagine.
As I said, I don't know anything about that story, so I don't get into that.
Well, I will be running a story on what you just told me, though. That's an interesting little sidebar. All right, Ryan, very cool. And because the story went national, our John Kelly story went national. And I don't know, Fark picked it up and it hit some others. So it was getting those on those national feeds. So I never made that connection. That's so funny.
Right. If you think of it, when you're in that lane, you'd never put two and two together.
Right, you wouldn't even think about it. Yeah. All right, I want to play. I want to play a little audio for you. It's 41 seconds long, so sit through it, and I want your take here.
Okay.
I read today about a 10-year-old girl with Down syndrome who was taken from her mother and put in a cage. I read about did you say want to a 10-year-old with Down syndrome being taken from her mother?
Pick anything you want out, but the bottom line is very clear.
You?
This is Corey Lewandowski. This is on your opponent to network there, Fox News.
How absolutely dare you, sir? How dare you?
We have
infants that are being taken from their mother.
This interview immediately turned into a Fox version of The View.
We have infants that are being stolen from their mothers and put into cages.
This country illegally, your parents understand.
I can't play it.
Oh, my gosh.
Corey Lewandowski, it is very interesting to watch the president's base defend the separation of these children from their parents. That's what's going on right now. What's your take?
Yeah, well, Bill, again, this goes back to a thing where you sometimes need to see the forest for the trees on these issues, and there's nobody that understands the president's base better than the president of the United States. And, the polling that's initially out on this issue, and we had some polling on it yesterday, shows that the president's base is with him on this. I think something like 52% of Republicans support this policy. So it's easy to get whooped up in the kind of the hysteria of the reporting on this because it's impossible to ignore children crying that are being ripped away from their parents. But there are a lot of people that see this as a deterrent. They feel that the people whose children are being taken away from them, their parents are committing a crime, and they're the ones that put them in that position. And the president knows that. And so the idea that this is in some sort of vacuum and this is, terribly optically bad for the president is true, but there's a reason that he's doing this. And he's trying to get a broad immigration strategy and policy put in place. He did the same thing with the DACA program, where he's taking an issue that tugs at people's heartstrings and basically putting it on the table and saying to Democrats, if you want this policy either removed or put in place, then you need to build me my wall. And Democrats are going for it. We have a staring contest, and there are real-life victims who are a part of this.
It is kind of well. Let's first talk about the about 50% of the president's base. 50% of Republicans support what's being done here, but that leaves 30% out there that were with the president that are not. To me, that's what makes this story a little bit different and a little bit dangerous with the midterms. I mean, it's a long time between now and November, but it is a little scary right now, wouldn't you think, for Republicans?
No, I can't remember who it was, but there was a Republican running for Congress somewhere that one of my colleagues did a profile on, and he talked about how he's been able to, kind of make his own name for himself, that the Republican brand in his district wasn't as bad as it was in other parts of the country. He thought he had a fighting chance of winning, but he offered up the caveat of the president is completely unpredictable, and he could launch a suicide bomb, a week before the election and totally derail his chances. And I think this is an example of that if you're somebody running for office with a Republican a brand attached to your name, you live and die with the president's policies. And this, you got to come up with some sort of a cogent answer to this and explain it away in a situation that voters can listen to and that resonates with them. How do you explain where you stand on the president's position, particularly when, and this is the thing that I think is important, and it loops back to what we were talking about before, it's not just about appeasing the moderate to left side of the political spectrum who thinks that this policy is abhorrent. It's also satisfying the right side of the political spectrum that actually thinks it's a good idea. That's the sticky wicket with Donald Trump. There's not a lot of gray area with him. If you're on his team, you're either with him completely or you're against him completely. And that's where so many Republicans running in districts all across the country have to deal with it, and it's a very difficult proposition.
It's funny because the talk has been that Katko is, he's a congressman out of the Syracuse
24th
area.
district, yeah.
Right.
He has kind of distanced himself from the president. He's been one of those that has been a little more independent. Yet, yesterday he had Pence stomping for him in the Syracuse area throughout the day yesterday. I thought that was a little surprising. Maybe he's not moving that far away from the president.
Right, and the other thing, too, you have to keep in mind about that is when you bring in the vice president or something along those lines, it's also about raising money. I mean, that's a huge injection of cash.
Yep.
Did we tell you it was $1,000 plate lunch?
Yeah.
Yeah, that you can take that political hit without it necessarily hurting your campaign all that much. I remember when Ray Meyer was running in 2006, brought Dick Cheney to town, and Dick Cheney was not very popular at that time, but it was a huge injection of cash into his campaign. I think that's the thing. But, here's the other thing, too, Bill, I think that's important to track today, is that so right now what Republicans in the Senate are going to do is they're probably going to put a bill out. And sorry, Luke, or
that's
Jack
right.
is yelling in the background here. Jack, I'm trying to do the radio. Be quiet. The Democrats or the Republicans in the Senate are going to put a bill out sometime today, maybe today or later or early tomorrow. Mm-hmm. That's essentially going to be a very narrow thread. It's going to say we're going to deal with just this issue of child separation, and we're going to pass a bill that says, that the president doesn't have this ability or the policy is no longer that we separate children from their families at the border. Chuck Schumer is going to be in a difficult position here. This is your senator. Because Schumer does not want to go along with that piece of legislation. He wants a more broad piece of legislation that deals with the issue of immigration writ large. What does Chuck Schumer and the Democrats do? Because there's a chance that they won't be able to get past that bill without Democrat support.
Sure,
does he tell his Democratic colleagues, we're going to support this, even though it could potentially be an exit strategy for Donald Trump? Or does he play hardball and say, no, we're not going to? I think that's a really important aspect of this to play out, because I think as much as Republicans are using these immigrants at the border as a political football, Democrats do it as well.
Oh, there's no doubt about it.
This is an opportunity for Chuck Schumer to put his money where his mouth is and say, listen, I don't care about I don't care about the long-term issues here. We need to solve this problem right now, and this is how we need to get it done. Does he do that, or does he say, no, this is something the president can do on his own, we're not going to help him? That's,
if he doesn't, I think he places himself in a very dangerous position where, they're constantly out talking about these poor children. How could you rip these children from their mothers and from their families? And now he's given an immediate opportunity to prevent that from happening, and he doesn't do it. I think that would be a real problem.
Yeah, and I think the broader issue here is, and I think that, so much of the conversation in Washington is about the partisan right and the partisan left, the extremes of these positions. But most Americans are somewhere in the middle. So most Americans couldn't explain to you what their comprehensive immigration solution is. They don't know the answer to that question. But they know right now that they don't want these kids separated from their parents anymore, and they want that problem solved today. Deal with everything else down the road. This is something that needs to get solved today. So the Democrats lose the high ground if they have an opportunity like that right in front of them and they pass it by.
Yeah.
It's a big political calculation for Chuck Schumer over the next couple of days.
All right, I want to ask you before we move on this the removal. When I saw the alert come over yesterday, I was pretty shocked. But when you read into it, there's a lot here. United States withdrawing from the UN Human Rights Council. And this move has taken some pretty big criticism from nonprofit groups and groups that help people around the world. But we're saying, listen, it's a cesspool of political bias. I think that's what Nikki Haley had said. This is the president playing hardball here once again around the world. What's the take up on Capitol Hill? How's the reaction?
I mean, this is a perfect example of how elections have consequences, right? These are the kinds of things that Donald Trump does that no other president would do. If you were upset with the Human Rights Council, if you were a previous administration, Republican or Democrat, you try and work it diplomatically through back channels to try and solve these problems. Donald Trump takes a butcher knife to these problems, not a surgeon's scalpel. And so he wants to come in and say, listen, I want to make a bold move here and show you guys that I'm unhappy with this, so we're pulling out completely. Now, the bigger problem here is there's a financial component to that.
Right.
The Human Rights Council has, a pretty big budget that we contribute to that, goes to help humanitarian causes around the world. And these nonprofits that you're talking about benefit from that because that's where they get part of their funding to solve some of these problems. So, I think that this is the president trying to flex his muscles on the foreign stage. And we've seen over the, year and a half of his presidency, sometimes that works as it maybe is starting to work with North Korea. Sometimes it doesn't work as we've seen with some of the other situations like Syria and that. So we'll have to see how this whole thing plays out. But, this is, I just say it again, this is an example of what you got when you decided to elect Donald Trump president.
And you're right. When no other president would do this, it would be worked behind the scenes. It would be, but this pulling out, as you said, we're not only pulling out, but we're taking our money with us, and that is going to have a major effect on that organization. Mm-hmm. Wild. All right, Ryan, crazy stuff.
All right, guys.
We appreciate it.
All the news in Utica there.
Love that John Kelly story. Holy cow! All right, have a great day. Thanks so much.
All right, later.
Ryan Nobles from CNN.